Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello, welcome to the latest episode of the Living Out podcast, where we are today talking about more of your questions. Not very long ago, we celebrated our 100th episode, and we asked you to let us know your questions about faith and sexuality, and you delivered. We got loads of great questions, so we decided to set aside a whole series of the podcast to talk about those. We're talking about things like church, experiencing same-sex attraction, friendship, evangelism, and today is the first of 2 episodes where we're going to talk about parenting. Lots of questions came in about parenting. So in this episode, we're going to talk particularly about parenting children, kind of think about under 12s. And in the next episode, we'll think about parenting teenagers. I'm Andrew. I'm part of the Emerging Generations team here at Living Out, and I'm really pleased to be joined by the other half of the Emerging Generations team, my friend and colleague, Ashley. Hello, Ashley. How are you today?
Hello, Andrew. I'm tired but good.
Tired but good. That's not bad. Well, it's lovely to have you here. And we're really thrilled to be joined today by Rachel Gilson, an author and a parent joining us from the States. Rachel, maybe you could say hello and tell us whatever you want our listeners to know about you by way of introduction.
Oh, wow. Well, hello. What does it mean to be introduced? I live in New England. I work for Cru, formerly Campus Crusade for Christ, a large evangelical ministry, international. So I serve on the leadership team for theological development and culture. Specifically, I give a lot of leadership to our work around the intersection between the gospel and LGBT questions. And I'm also working on my dissertation through Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in public theology. I'm working on how can we construct a positive theological, ethical vision for gender for evangelicals in light of transgender identities.
Brilliant. I look forward to reading that when it comes out. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really great to have you here. And as the starting point for our episodes in this series, we've also got questions submitted by you for our obligatory bit of banter at the beginning. And our listener submitted question today is, if you had a superpower, what would it be and why? Ashley, I'm going to come to you first. What would you pick for your superpower?
My typical answer to this is the ability to fly. I would love to be able to fly. But my friend the other day made a great case for being super stretchy. I've forgotten her name from The Incredibles, the wife.
Yes, I know who you mean.
Stretch all of her limbs out and things. No. He, at the time, for context, he was lying on the sofa and his cup of tea was just out of reach. And he went, if I had that superpower, I wouldn't have to get up and get my tea. And I thought that was such a good point he made.
And flight is a little more complex in a world with all these personal drones.
That's very true.
Yeah.
It could be a hazard actually, flying with all the drones. So maybe stretchiness is the way to go.
I didn't even think about stretchiness. I might be rethinking my answer now, but I like that. Rachel, what would your superpower of choice be?
Well, right now what I'm thinking about is how much I need sleep. Is there some sort of superpower that gives me more sleep? Like maybe you push pause on time that also pauses my aging, and I can get a little nap in and then unpause it and sort of everything picks up. I don't know what the name of that one is, but if I could work that out, that'd be great.
Yeah, that was actually, I had a very similar thought. My first thought was, I remember this program when I was a kid. I think it was called Bernard's Watch or something. He had this watch, like a pocket watch, and he clicked it and it did pause time.
Yeah, there you go.
And actually my first thought also was I could pause time for a nap. Yeah. But then I got a bit holy on myself. I thought, actually, is it a really bad thing? God gives us enough time to do what he calls us to do, so maybe I shouldn't do that.
That's so true. So wait, basically what you're saying is I need to repent. Wow. Okay, that's fine. It's a good way to start.
No. I thought I eventually concluded. I think I concluded I'd actually go for something like kind of teleportation or maybe flying. Just I thought I travel lots, and actually sometimes the journey isn't as good as the destination.
Yeah, that's right.
So sometimes just being able to be somewhere would be nice. So yeah, maybe actually just the kind of ability to teleport to be somewhere. Well, interesting and a great question to ask your kids. If you are a parent listening in, why not ask your kids, if you had a superpower, what would it be and why? Rachel, last year you released a book about parenting called Parenting Without Panic in an LGBT Affirming World. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that book, why you wrote it and what you hope it does.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I wrote it was because I kept getting emails from people who had interacted with my first book, Born Again This Way. And they were like, I really am appreciating the way that you talk about the Bible and sexuality, but I've got these 4-year-olds, I've got this 6-year-old, and I'm not going to hand him your book. And I'm not even sure myself how to communicate some of these ideas to my littler kids. In addition to that, I have my own child and was kind of flustered by, oh shoot, how do you talk to young people about this? And my community, my church is filled with little kids. So I was talking with other moms and dads and thinking, shoot, we've got to think of a good game plan. So I really wrote Parenting Without Panic in response to the fear that was behind a lot of these questions. There was just a lot of fear, and fear of a lot of different things, fear of maybe saying something to their children that then their children repeat and it comes out really differently than what mom or dad said. Fear that our kids will find what the world says about our bodies and sexuality is more attractive than what God says. Fear about saying the wrong thing. Fear of looking foolish. So I thought perhaps we can start a conversation. This book is by no means an attempt to fulfill a conversation, but to begin a conversation thinking, okay, what are some of the things we have from God's word that can give us legs to stand on as we talk to our little kids?
Brilliant, yeah, and I think it does that brilliantly. I've read it, I really like it. It's a nice kind of bite-sized book. It's not too long, so for busy parents to fit in. And there's loads of things I like about it. I like the way you summarise at the end of each chapter, and there's some really practical stuff at the end, isn't there? Kind of parenting advice, ideas. And what I was really struck by as well is the fact that the book does what it says, of it is very unpanicked. And actually, it was almost a calming book to read.
Glad.
And I thought, actually, this is so good because you stay calm in it, and it really does. I'm not a parent, but it really does make you think, actually, this can be done, and there are good ways of engaging with children. So I would really encourage any parents who do feel panicked or do feel fearful. I think there's many around these particular topics. It is a great book to get hold of. We'll stick a link in the show notes. And as we go through our conversation today, no doubt we'll be getting some little hints of that as well, and some of the wisdom from the book as we go. As we're going to come to the first question, which actually I'm going to take straight to you, Rachel, because I think you do this great in the book. Someone was asked, can you recommend some scripts for parents wanting to broach the topic of sexuality and gender with younger children, or circling back for deeper conversations with older children? They've said something to help ease the awkwardness. Is there a magic formula? A way of talking to ease the awkwardness, or at least something to get some conversations going?
Yeah, that's right. And it's so important too. And we have to remember, we often feel much more awkward about talking about bodies and where babies come from than our kids do because we're grown-ups. So we've had our own baggage around sexual feelings or sexual experiences. It's helpful to remember our little kids, I mean, actually, some little kids do deal with this, but in general, our little kids don't have that kind of baggage. So there's less fraughtness on their part. So we can remember that. The second thing that's really helpful when we're talking to our little kids is we've experienced your conversations with your little kids are short. We don't feel like we have to shove $100 conversations into $1 moments. Right? You can translate that to pounds if you need to. So even if we feel like we didn't do it right the first time, we've got all these little check-ins, right? So it can be really great. You can just talk to your kids scripts. You're like, have you ever wondered where new life comes from? Sometimes you can start with animals if you're feeling nervous, right? Like maybe you have a family dog or you see bunnies in a field. Like, oh, have you ever wondered where new life comes from? And you're like, oh, and your kids might be like, no, go away. But that'd be. I like open questions like that of scripts, or if you've got a question asker, they're like, where do babies come from? And you need a moment of vamping, you can say, you know what, darling, that's a great question, important question. It's nice to have some filler in your vocabulary to give yourself time to have a breath, right? Be like, that's such an important question, what an interesting question. I'm so glad you asked. That's probably the most important thing in the filler. And if you're talking about reproduction, right, you start out with baby language, right? You can think like, wait, every mammal you see starts from a seed and an egg coming together. Oh, if you have a seed and an egg from a cat, they come together, you'll get kittens. And a seed and an egg from a pig, you put them together, you'll get a pig. You get a seed and an egg from a human, you'll get a new human life. You can actually just start there. You don't even have to go, right? You're just giving building blocks. And then your child might ask, well, where the heck do those seed and egg come from? Or is it like the seed and eggs I see in a store? Like, no, they're actually different. They're made inside our bodies, right? And so they might not ask you questions though. So then later you'd say, you remember how we talked about that interesting seed and egg conversation? Well, did you know that male bodies always make the seed and female bodies always make the egg? So you have to have a male and a female together to make new life. For any mammal, you can start to just construct these conversations, and they can be pretty quick, which is nice. And so I give some of these throughout the book, right? So you introduce pieces of vocabulary, you kind of scaffold the conversations on each other. You give your child a lot of room to ask questions or even to not ask questions. Sometimes you just throw it out there, let it marinate a little bit, revisit later, which is very similar to how we talk to our children about the gospel, right? I don't feel like, oh, I have to tell my daughter once about what the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ means, and then we're done. That's not how it happens. And I don't expect her at 4-year-old to need, deep atonement theory or like all these different construals of the value of the resurrection, right? I want to tell her over and over again the basic building blocks. Jesus died for you. He died in your place. He rose again triumphant. He's alive for you, right? We know we can practice it. Oh, we've got small pieces that are the crucial pieces that we build on later. And I think we can use that same kind of framework as we talk to our kids about the goodness of their bodies and the goodness of how God designed relationship.
It reminds me of what there's a group we sometimes recommend resources from called Axis, who help parents.
Yes.
They make the point of what kids need is not one big sex talk,
That's right.
but lots of
Right.
little touch points, little conversations across their childhood and teen years. And same with gospel conversations, actually. I think that is true. And also, I hope makes it feel a little bit more manageable
Yeah.
for parents. It's not, we've got to have this one thing, you've got one shot, you're probably going to make it up.
Get it right,
so there we are. But no, actually, it's lots of little moments, lots of little opportunities. Is a much more manageable way, as well as healthy, I think, for the child way of doing it as well.
And if we have lots of little conversations and we use affirming language like, I'm so glad you asked, or this is really important and we should talk about it, you're communicating to your children, mom or dad is calm and confident. I'm never going to be reprimanded for asking a question. I'm never going to be shamed for asking a question. Mom and dad know what they're talking about. They're going to tell me the truth. They're not afraid. So as we build that, we also just build a relationship with our child that says, oh, our kid is going to hear all kinds of crazy stuff about humanity as they're out in the world. And if they can have a base that my mom and my dad and the grownups at church that I trust, they're going to tell me the truth about bodies and relationships. They're going to help me and they're not afraid. That's honestly probably even more important than the particular words that you use.
Yeah. And let me throw in one other script as well if we move to the next question, which I've said to parents often, and there's one I think you use the language of kingship and Holy Spirit in the book. And the way I've often just described it to parents is the way we can help children begin to navigate the tension of living in a world where what they're being taught is right and good is so often not what they see in the world around them. It's often the phrase I tend to use is helping children get the idea of we love Jesus, and so we are seeking to live his way and follow him. But we also love those who don't love him and follow him because he loves them. Which actually, I say it's quite wordy for a little kid, but it's that concept. I think your concept of kingship is better.
You don't hang out with a lot of 5-year-olds, do you?
I think your concept of kingship is a more simple way of saying that. Actually, we follow Jesus as king, but other people don't, and that's why they live differently. And just beginning to help children have a framework in which to process that confusing thing of mum and dad, or whoever it is saying this is right and good, but then I'm seeing so much different around us. And then as they get older, we're bringing more kind of explanation and more depth to that. But just that, I think, is a great script, a great way of talking, a great starting point for laying some foundations, I guess, with our youngest kids.
And that reminds me, like when we're thinking about how I talk to my kids about LGBT questions, there's at least 3 different types of conversations we're having. Sometimes we're having a conversation about biology, just like bodies and what they do. Sometimes we're having a conversation about theology, because Christians actually understand that there's a lot happening in marriage and singleness and male and female that points to things God cares about, not just the bare biological facts. There's also the mission conversation. The fact that part of the way that our bodies and relationships promote the good news is because our neighbors actually need God's good word. They need relationship with him. They need to understand themselves in light of who he is. And so It can even help to think, oh, like, which of the conversations am I having with my kids right now? We're talking biology, theology, or missiology. And each of them brings in their own unique, important aspects, like you were pointing to with kingship.
A follow-up question on the kingship thing. Just thinking
Yeah.
through, so I know of some very young children actually who they know of me, and they don't know all the ins and outs of my life, but they could do if the conversation came up in terms of same-sex attraction, but
Yeah.
the biblical sexual ethic that I would hold. But then they're also aware of other people in their lives who would say they follow Jesus. So, in a child's mind, you're kind of putting them under that Jesus is king bracket. But then they would say something different in terms of sexuality, or they would live something different in terms of sexuality. Have you got a way of talking to, say, even a 3, 4, 5-year-old about that kind of thing?
Yes. And that's so important, right? Because I think even for grown-ups, the question of Christians who hold to a different understanding of what scripture promotes, that's the hardest question we have here. It's easy to understand why non-Christians don't act like Christians. So thinking about how I communicate this to a little kid, one of the ways I've thought about it is we're never wanting to say, oh, well, someone isn't a Christian just because they don't agree with me. We're not called to play salvation police, right? If someone says Jesus is their king, we always take that seriously. And so, what do we do when we have different understandings of what the king says? Well, we have to go back to God's word. It's a little like, I mean, I don't know, use with a 3-year-old, right? But it's a little like you have an executive branch and you have like the law, right? And they need to be in concert together. 3-year-olds won't care about that, right? But you say, like, okay, well, the king has given us his word. So what we need to do together whenever citizens of this king disagree is we need to come together respectfully, try to talk about what is the best way to understand what God has told us. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it has a lot of feelings involved, but we're always called to rely on the Holy Spirit and to go to the word, no matter what, especially when there are disagreements. And our kids might have a lot of questions after that, and that's not going to paper over some really difficult conversations that need to happen. But it can teach our children a really important principle, which is that if we claim God as our king, we have to be constantly formed by the scriptures and by our best understanding in our community of what those scriptures hold out.
Brilliant, thank you. Let's move on to a second question. I'm going to put this to you, Ashley, as someone who is a youth worker. This says, as a kids or youth worker, where is the balance between teaching children about sexuality from a biblical perspective and the responsibility of Christian parents to guide them in this area? How have you navigated that? I know your context is more youth, but it'd be applicable to children as well.
I do think that there is a balance of responsibility. I think that it's mainly the parents' responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility to raise the child. But as a youth worker or a kids worker, or really anyone in the church, you're involved in the life of this young person, and we are family all together. And so I think it's part of our role, all of us, to be parenting these children and to be raising these children and supporting the parents as they have that kind of primary goal. But really, it's all of us. I think we run into problems when either a parent or a youth worker starts shirking their responsibilities a bit here. Either the parent goes, oh no, the youth worker or the kids worker will handle that and I don't need to talk to my young person about it. Or the youth worker goes, oh no, parents will talk about that at home, so we don't need to do it. I think, you run the risk of both parties doing that and then no one's talking to these young people about sexuality at all. And that's a whole problem. Ideally, it's all working together and everyone is talking about it. So you've got parents are a place that children can go if maybe they don't understand something the kids worker said, or they have more questions, and they can be just having these ongoing conversations through the days and the weeks and the years with their parents. But then also in reverse, you've got kids workers and youth workers who are trusted adults, and the kids can go to them to ask their questions. Maybe they don't want to go to their parents or can't for whatever reason. So I think that's the ideal, that we're all a team together and we're supporting each other and supporting this child or young person together.
And it's so important if it's not just your parents saying it. If there are other grown-ups who love Jesus and love you, who agree with your parents and who are able to express it slightly differently, that only can strengthen the child's opportunity to really see what God says as
Yeah,
good.
absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm just adding, I think the relationship between kids workers, youth workers, and parents is really important. So thinking, for example, about where we've released our youth series Kaleidoscope, we've really encouraged youth workers to make contact with parents to let them know what they're going to be doing. And actually, Kaleidoscope helps them to do that and gives them a summary of the series and stuff. But whenever I think youth workers, kids workers are going to engage with these topics, having conversation with parents actually, so it can be that sense of we're going to work as a team in this. It's really important. Or it might be you as a parent want to ask the question of a children's worker, youth worker, are you at any point, or do you at any point engage with topics like bodies, like relationships actually, and how are you going to do that so we can best do that kind of in partnership together? So just good communication, I think, can really help there as well.
Hello, it's Andy here, interrupting your podcast. Would your church or ministry benefit from an event talking about faith and sexuality? We as a Living Out speaking team love travelling across the UK and even internationally to speak at a variety of events, from individual churches to bigger Christian organisations. In each of our events, we aim to speak from the Bible about God's great purpose for sexuality, to equip churches to be good places for those who experience same-sex attraction, and to help people to engage culturally with wider questions about sexuality. And there's always opportunity for questions and answers. So if you think you would benefit, or your church would benefit from this, do check out the Living Out events page, where you can see information on how to book a speaker. And now, back to the podcast.
Welcome back. Here is our next listener submitted question. This question asks for thoughts on sending your kids to mainstream school versus Christian school in view of the way that sexuality is taught about in schools. But then it says, but if all Christian parents are sending their kids to Christian schools, who's reaching out to the young people in mainstream schools? And actually, this is also a really great conversation to have with both UK and US based people, because there'll be some differences in our context here as well. So I might ask you this question first, Rachel, and then we can chip in as well. And it'll be interesting to see how which side of the pond we are affects our perspective.
The schooling question is really important. And this is something that's on my mind a lot because I live right outside of Boston, extremely progressive. I don't know when this episode's coming out, but we're recording during Pride Month, and the school system couldn't be more behind the fact that it's Pride Month, for example, you know? So my daughter had an assembly where they did an LGBT related craft, the whole thing. So, I mean, that outs myself. My daughter is in the local, as I would say, public school. So we've got to consider where we live and what the challenges and opportunities are and what our kids are like. For me, I have a child. She is so contrarian. Everything she hears, she's going to say no to first. And so I thought, I think she's going to be okay in this local school because she's not just going to accept everything that they speak to. She's going to question it immediately. And because she and I have been having conversations about these questions for a long time, we've established a relationship where we're already having our own conversations, and we can talk about what is she hearing at school. So if we feel like if we want to put our kids in those contexts, we have to be having conversations with our children and letting them know we want to have those conversations. We're here to help them. But there are a lot of, you might have a child who you think, I don't know if this child's going to thrive well in that context for whatever reason. And so a Christian school can be a great choice. What's interesting in my Boston context is there are actually many populations here who don't like the aggressive LGBT narrative that's being pressed in the public schools. So there's actually a lot of non-Christians sending their kids to the Christian schools. And that's created a different and interesting environment even in the Christian schools, because the Christian schools weren't previously enrolling so many non-Christian students. And so that means even if my child is at a Christian school, I'm not always in control over what they're hearing, who they're hearing it from, because their peers are bringing in all kinds of data, even if what they're hearing from the classroom is one thing. So no matter what we decide, my number one question is, are we able to make this decision not out of fear? The scripture says, God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and self-control. So whatever decision we make, are we reliant on the Spirit and not entrapped by our fear.
That's such good, helpful wisdom, yeah. And I totally agree. I think it's very much a case-by-case thing. I think in a context over here, where people might be more likely to opt for homeschooling rather than a Christian school. Christian schools not being particularly common over here. And I think I totally agree. It's kind of a case-by-case, child-by-child, situation-by-situation thing in part. And I think one thing I would say also is I think even if over here, for example, someone chooses to homeschool, I think we still need to have these conversations because there's going to come a point, whether it is sooner or later. And that's one of my worries in a sense, that people can think, oh, we can just shield children from these conversations full stop. But there's going to come a point eventually. And actually, if they are much older when they hear about stuff and haven't been prepared at all, that could, I think, be even more detrimental than them being exposed to it earlier than we'd like, but that forcing the conversation. So I think just the importance of that. And I love the fact this question does also have missional edge. I love the thing of actually, if we take all Christian kids out of mainstream schools, I would just want to say, let's be kind of aware of that and make sure that we are making mission a real priority for our kids as well, and that we are helping there be context for that. So I think it's my closest friends homeschool. I had a great thing the other day about their 7-year-old who they're being at a homeschooling event and they're deliberately involved in some which aren't just Christians. And he and this other 7-year-old boy said they were going to go sit over on the bench for a chit chat. Apparently, it's the language they use. And later, the mother of the other boy, they're not a Christian family, although they're exploring faith, apparently asked the boy, "What were you and your friend talking about?" He said, "Oh, we were talking lots about Jesus." I thought it was like so exciting to hear that my 7-year-old, my best friend's kids, is taking a friend off to talk about Jesus. But it was just reminded me, just because they're homeschooled doesn't mean actually there's not a missional front line for them as well, actually. And so I think thinking about whatever age our kids are, whatever context they are, what is the missional front line for them, as we just think about that all for all of us in our lives, is really relevant and really important. Let's keep moving because we've got so many great questions. I'm going to come first to you on this one, Ashley. This question asks, what influence is the internet and social media and even actually AI having on sexuality in today's culture? And that will particularly hit maybe younger people, which is why we're thinking about it in this episode today.
Immense influence. I actually think it's hard to understate the influence that the internet and socials and AI are having. I mean, if you even just think children have, well, assuming they have a smartphone, depending on what age bracket we're talking, just have access to the sum of human knowledge in their pocket. They have access to vast realms of pornography in their pocket. Any question that they might have about sexuality, a question that, say, when I was growing up, I might have been embarrassed to ask and I had no real route to ask it, or a question that actually we might want those young people and children to be asking us, they can just ask anonymously on their phone, and they can find internet forums and discussions and blogs and videos all chipping into that topic. Again, just on their phone, in their pocket. I think that is very significant, actually, just the access, the instant and anonymous access that young people can have to all of that. The fact that it's an anonymous space, I think, is important as well. It's a place where you can explore things that you wouldn't in reality, where it's kind of a lack of the boundaries that you'd have around normal social interaction in person. People feel freer online to say things and do things that they wouldn't do in person. And obviously that has a massive impact on various areas of sexuality. You can end up with huge echo chambers as well. So the way that algorithms work, we don't even really realize it, but they kind of register the sort of things you're looking at and they give you more of those things, and it can get more and more extreme, and you don't realize that you're not actually hearing different views and different perspectives in the way that you do as you're kind of moving through the real world. And so again, that is just shaping our whole view of sexuality and what it means to be human in a certain way. All of these things. And then AI, I think, I won't try and get too far into AI in the last couple of minutes that we have, but I think that's another technological advancement that we're relatively unprepared for. And there could be some really great things about AI. I don't want to be just down on technology. I think technology is actually a wonderful gift. But as with all technology, AI is something that we human beings could use to do great harm. We're starting to see that in things like deep fakes. You know, if you can so easily now just create a photo or a video that's not actually real but is picturing someone. So, you know, I could create a photo of Taylor Swift sitting with me at a dinner party when she wasn't really there. I could do that. I can't do that myself. I have no visual design skills whatsoever, but I could do that so easily in AI, with AI. And again, when you come to the realm of sexuality, you can end up in very horrific places with that. So having said all of that, I would say don't actually be scared of technology. Don't try and cut your kids off from the internet altogether. I don't think that's the way to go. But I would just encourage parents to be aware of what is out there and what is going on and the kind of things that your kids are very naturally going to be accessing. Educate yourself about it a little bit and find ways to engage your kids in conversation about the things that they're seeing and hearing. Don't I think Rachel said something similar earlier. Don't try and shut them off from the world completely, but go, how can we engage together in what's going on for you? And Andrew, as you mentioned, Axis, they have some really great resources for parents just trying to help parents engage with this kind of stuff. So I'll put some links in the show notes. They've done little parent guides on various things which have bits of information and conversation starters for you to use with your kids and your young people. So we'll stick some of those in the show notes.
Those can be really helpful starting points for parents, and particularly thinking about younger children today. Just to say, I think these are conversations to start with younger children as well. Those things of safe use of technology, of internet engagement and stuff, actually, the younger we can start that, and being responsible as parents and think, actually, how are we making sure there are necessary and helpful safeguards in place there? We want to train and protect simultaneously our children to help them to navigate the blessings, but also the real challenges of living in such a kind of technologically fast-paced developing world and context. So we are actually quite quickly running out of time, but let me mention a few resources that parents of under 12s might find helpful to continue thinking about this, because there are so many more topics and questions we could talk about. My big plug is for Rachel's book, Parenting Without Panic in an LGBT Affirming World. Really is a brilliant bite-sized resource for parents and would just highly, highly recommend it. A few other books for parents. Ed Drew, our friend over at Faith in Kids, a couple of years ago now, published Raising Confident Kids in a Confusing World, which talks quite broadly about raising kids and the topic of identity, but also engages with conversations around bodies and relationships and friendship and marriage as well, and helping children understand that, which links to the great materials that Faith in Kids have put out around those topics as well. So do look at those. And another one I was really helped by is by Julia Sadusky. It's called Start Talking to Your Kids About Sex, subtitle A Practical Guide for Catholics. And actually this book isn't particularly tailored to Catholics, and I thought there was such helpful wisdom in there from Julia Sadusky, who I think is a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, and brings loads of wisdom from her professional work. And then two others which are really fun. These are picture books designed for quite young children, written by Sam Albury, one of the founders of Living Out. One is called God's Signpost, How Marriage Points Us to God's Love, and the other is called God's Go-Togethers, a celebration of God's design for people. And they're beautiful picture books with illustrations from a professional illustrator, which are just ways of talking to children about marriage as a signpost to Christ and the church. And they could be great kind of starting points, as we were saying earlier, about those kind of scripts. That could be a great way to get that conversation going. We have run out of time, so I'm going to say a big thank you to our guests. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Rachel, for being here, for your great wisdom that you shared in this conversation. And thanks to you, listener. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it and been blessed by this. If you have, and you know parents or other parents of under 12s, why not pass this episode to them, recommend it to them. And don't forget to like, to subscribe, to review us to help others to find the podcast. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Our next episode, we'll be talking about parenting teenagers. So if you've got teenagers, make sure you're there. If you know people who've got teenagers, make sure you recommend them. And I hope you'll be back with us for our next episode.